Millionaire CEO came home unannounced and froze at what the janitor single father was teaching his twin girls. Before anything else, if this video finds you well, wherever you are, let me know how it made you feel at the end. The marble floors of the Sterling mansion echoed with Victoria's designer heels as she burst through the front door, her phone pressed against her ear. I don't care if the Tokyo merger falls through, Patricia. Make it happen, or find someone who can. She ended the call with the same cold precision she'd used to build her tech empire from nothing. Victoria Sterling, 27 years old, 5'6" with platinum blonde hair pulled into a perfect chignon, commanded respect in every room she entered. Forbes had called her the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley, and she wore that title like armor. Her Hermes suite cost more than most people's cars, her time was worth thousands per minute, and emotion was a luxury she'd never allowed herself. She expected silence in her $15 million sanctuary. Instead, soft voices drifted from the living room. Dear God, please watch over Mommy in heaven and help Emma with her bad dreams, and the voice belonged to a child. Victoria froze. She lived alone. No children had ever set foot in her pristine home. She crept toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the archway she saw something that made her breath catch. On her white Italian leather sofa, two identical little girls sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, their small hands folded in prayer. They couldn't have been older than 6, with wild brown curls and gap-toothed smiles that somehow filled the cold space with warmth. Kneeling beside them was Marcus Rodriguez, her cleaning service employee. At 35, he was tall and lean with calloused hands that spoke of hard work and gentle eyes that held depths of sorrow Victoria had never noticed in their brief encounters. His janitor's uniform was clean but worn, and his voice carried a tenderness that made something deep in Victoria's chest ache. "And please, God," continued the second little girl, "help the sad lady who lives here learn how to smile again. Emma says her heart is broken just like ours was when Mommy went to heaven." Victoria's knees nearly buckled. The sad lady. They were praying for her. Marcus's voice was gentle as warm honey. "That's beautiful, Sophie. And remember what we talked about. Sometimes when people seem angry or cold, they're just scared and hurting inside. Like how you were when Mommy died," asked Emma, the first twin. "Exactly like that, sweetheart. But God helped Daddy learn that love doesn't end when someone goes away. It just finds new places to grow." Victoria pressed her back against the wall, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. She'd fired people for less than having their children in her home. She should be furious. Instead, she felt something cracking open inside her chest, something she'd sealed away 15 years ago, when the state had told her she was officially alone in the world. The twins began singing a children's hymn in Spanish and broken English, their voices pure and sweet. Marcus joined in, his baritone wrapping around their melody like a protective embrace. The sound filled corners of Victoria's home that had been silent since she'd bought it 3 years ago. "Daddy, why doesn't the lady ever smile when she sees us?" Sophie whispered when the song ended. "Maybe she's forgotten how, mija. Sometimes grown-ups forget the most important things when they get too busy. Can we teach her? Like you taught us after we stopped smiling?" Victoria's throat burned. She couldn't remember the last time someone had wanted to teach her anything that wasn't related to profit margins or market domination. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had cared whether she smiled. She couldn't remember the last time she had smiled. "We can try, but that's something she'll have to want to learn," Marcus said softly. "Some people build walls so high that love has trouble finding its way in. But love always finds a way," Emma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You told us that when we were too sad to eat. You're right, sweetheart. Love always finds a way." Victoria closed her eyes, her executive composure crumbling like a house of cards. She'd built her fortune by reading people, by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone. But she'd never seen this coming. She'd never seen Marcus as anything more than efficient help, never noticed the wedding ring he still wore on a chain around his neck, never wondered about the photo of 2 beautiful little girls he kept tucked in his shirt pocket. She'd never wondered about his story because she'd trained herself not to care about anyone else's story. Caring was dangerous. Caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness, and weakness meant ending up alone and forgotten like she had at 12 years old, when her grandmother's heart had simply stopped beating, leaving her with nothing but a trust fund and the cold embrace of boarding schools. But standing there, listening to 2 6-year-old girls pray for her broken heart with an innocence that cut through every defense she'd ever built, Victoria realized that maybe being alone wasn't the same as being strong. Maybe it was just being afraid. The timer on Marcus's phone buzzed softly. "Okay, Miss Amores, time to pack up." Daddy has work to finish before we go home. Can we say one more prayer for the sad lady? Sophie asked. Victoria held her breath. Of course, baby. The twins joined hands with their father, forming a small circle of love on her expensive rug. God, please help the lady remember that she's not alone. Help her see that love is everywhere if she just opens her heart to find it. Amen. Amen, Marcus whispered. Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing. When had anyone ever prayed for her? When had anyone ever seen through her armor to the scared little girl still hiding underneath? She heard movement and quickly retreated to the foyer, her mind racing. She should confront Marcus about bringing his children to work. She should fire him for this breach of professional boundaries. She should restore order to her perfectly controlled world. Instead, she found herself walking to her home office, closing the door and doing something she hadn't done in 15 years. Victoria Sterling, the ice queen of Silicon Valley, put her head in her hands and wept for everything she'd lost and everything she'd never allowed herself to want. Outside her office, she could hear Marcus gathering his supplies and the soft chatter of his daughters. In 30 minutes, they'd be gone, and her house would return to its pristine, lonely silence. But something had shifted in those few moments of eavesdropping. Something that would make it impossible for Victoria to pretend she hadn't heard two little girls ask God to heal her broken heart. Something that would make it impossible to pretend she didn't want exactly that. 3 days later, Victoria sat in her corner office on the 40th floor of Sterling Industries, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline without seeing it. The conversation she'd overheard played on repeat in her mind like a song she couldn't shake. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those two little girls with their hands folded in prayer, asking God to help her remember she wasn't alone. But she was alone. She'd built her entire identity around being alone. Victoria? Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your 2 o'clock is here. Victoria straightened her shoulders and smoothed her Armani blazer. Send him in. Marcus Rodriguez entered her office carrying a clipboard and wearing the same humble expression he'd worn during their previous brief encounters. But now Victoria couldn't help noticing details that had escaped her before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, suggesting he smiled often when she wasn't around. The care with which he'd polished his work boots. The small silver cross hanging from his neck almost hidden beneath his collar. Ms. Sterling, you wanted to discuss the cleaning schedule? Victoria had called him here under the pretense of reviewing building maintenance, but now that he stood before her, she found herself speechless. How did you tell someone you'd heard their children pray for your soul? How did you admit that a 6-year-old's innocent words had shattered 15 years of carefully constructed emotional walls? Please, sit down, she managed. Marcus looked surprised but took the chair across from her massive mahogany desk. This close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes, the calluses on his hands from years of manual labor, the small scar on his chin that somehow made him look more real than anyone else in her sterile corporate world. Your daughters, Victoria began, then stopped. Marcus tensed, and she realized he thought he was in trouble. They seemed like lovely girls. The change in his expression was immediate and profound. His entire face lit up with a pride so pure it made Victoria's chest ache. Emma and Sophie are my whole world, Miss Sterling. They're 6 years old, twins, and they're... He paused, as if searching for words adequate to describe them. They're the best parts of their mother and me, all wrapped up in these tiny, fearless little people who still believe in magic. Their mother? Victoria asked softly, though she already knew part of the answer. Marcus's smile dimmed, but didn't disappear. Maria passed away 2 years ago. Car accident on the 405 during a rainstorm. She was coming home from her night shift at the hospital. She was a nurse and... He cleared his throat. The girls were only 4. They barely understood what death meant. Victoria's throat constricted. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Marcus's voice was steady, but she could see the grief that still lived in his eyes. Maria was the strong one, the one who kept us all grounded. When she died, I thought I'd lost not just my wife, but my ability to be the father they needed. For months, the girls wouldn't speak, wouldn't play. They just sat in their room holding each other, and I had no idea how to reach them. What changed? Marcus smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. Prayer. Not just my prayers. Theirs. One night, about 6 months after Maria died, I found them in the living room at midnight. They were holding hands and talking to their mother like she was sitting right there with them. Sophie was telling her about a butterfly she'd seen at school, and Emma was asking her to help with a bad dream. Victoria found herself leaning forward, drawn into his story despite herself. At first I thought I should stop them, that it wasn't healthy. But then Emma looked at me and said, Daddy, Mommy says she's not really gone. She says love doesn't end. It just moves to a different place. Those were almost the exact words Maria used to say when we'd argue about her working so many night shifts. She'd say, "Mi amor, love doesn't end when I leave for work. It just moves to a different place and waits for me to come home." Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes. "So you started praying with them?" "We started talking with them. To God, to Maria, to anyone who might be listening to two little girls trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become very scary and confusing." Marcus's voice grew warm with memory, and slowly they started laughing again, started playing, started believing that even when terrible things happen, there's still good in the world worth fighting for. Victoria thought about her own childhood, about the silence that had filled the apartment after her grandmother's funeral, about the lawyers and social workers who had spoken about her like she wasn't in the room, about the boarding school dormitories where crying was a sign of weakness and love was something other people's families had. "You're a good father," she said quietly. Marcus's eyes widened slightly at the genuine admiration in her voice. "I try to be. Some days I feel like I'm just making it up as I go along, but then one of them will do something that reminds me so much of Maria that I know she's still helping me raise them." "Like what?" "Last week, Emma gave her lunch money to a kid at school whose parents couldn't afford to buy him one. When I asked her why, she said, 'Mommy always said sharing is how love grows.' Sophie does the same thing. She sees someone sad and immediately wants to fix it. Like..." He stopped, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "Like what?" Victoria pressed. Marcus shifted in his chair. "Like when we're at your house. Sophie always asks me if the lady who lives there is okay because she never sees her smile. Emma says you look like someone who's forgotten how to be happy, and they both want to help somehow." Victoria's heart slammed against her ribs. "They talk about me? All the time." Marcus's voice was gentle. "Not in a bad way, they're just concerned. They see sadness in people the way other kids see colors. It's a gift Maria had too. She could walk into a room and immediately know who needed a kind word or a hug. And they think I need those things?" Marcus met her eyes directly for the first time since entering her office. "Ms. Sterling, with all due respect, everyone needs those things. The girls just haven't learned yet that some adults have forgotten how to ask for them." Victoria stared at him, struck by the quiet wisdom in his words. Here was a man who cleaned her floors for minimum wage, who had lost everything that mattered most to him, who was raising 2 children alone, and somehow he understood things about the human heart that all her business degrees and corporate success had never taught her. "May I ask you something personal?" she heard herself saying. Marcus nodded. "How do you do it? How do you keep believing in goodness when life has taken so much from you?" For a long moment, Marcus was quiet. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of Emma and Sophie at a park, their faces smeared with ice cream and lit up with pure joy. Because of them. Because every morning they wake up expecting the world to be full of possibilities. Because when Sophie finds a penny on the sidewalk, she makes a wish and truly believes it will come true. Because when Emma sees a rainbow, she still looks for the pot of gold. He put the phone away and looked directly at Victoria. "Maria used to say that faith isn't about believing everything will be easy. It's about believing that love is stronger than loss, that hope is stronger than fear, and that tomorrow always has the chance to be better than today." Victoria felt tears threatening again. "What if you've forgotten how to believe those things?" Marcus's smile was soft and knowing. "Then you find someone who remembers and you let them teach you all over again." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that Victoria wasn't sure she was ready to unpack. But for the first time in 15 years she felt something stirring in her chest that might have been hope. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said finally. Marcus stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Ms. Sterling, the girls would be thrilled to know you asked about them. They pray for you every night, you know. They pray that God will help you find whatever it is you're looking for." After he left, Victoria sat alone in her office as the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought about 2 little girls who saw sadness in strangers and wanted to heal it. She thought about a man who had lost everything and still chose to believe in love. Most of all, she thought about the question that had been haunting her since she'd overheard their prayer. What was she looking for? The answer scared her more than any corporate takeover or board meeting ever had. She was looking for home. Victoria's Bentley sat in her driveway for 20 minutes before she found the courage to go inside. It had been a week since her conversation with Marcus, and she'd spent every day since then fighting the urge to change her work schedule just so she could accidentally encounter him and his daughters again. The rational part of her mind, the part that had built a billion-dollar empire, insisted this was ridiculous. She was Victoria Sterling, the woman who had negotiated with heads of state and made CEOs twice her age tremble. She didn't pine after her cleaning staff, or wonder what 6-year-old twins were doing at bedtime. But the part of her mind that had awakened during that overheard prayer refused to be silenced. She finally forced herself out of the car and into her house. But instead of heading straight to her home office as usual, she found herself drawn to the living room where she'd witnessed something that had fundamentally changed her understanding of what it meant to be alive. The room looked exactly the same as always, pristine, expensive, cold. But Victoria could still hear the echo of children's laughter and Marcus's gentle voice, teaching his daughters that love was stronger than loss. Her phone buzzed with its usual parade of urgent emails, but for once, Victoria ignored it. Instead, she walked to the window that overlooked her perfectly manicured backyard and tried to remember the last time she'd felt truly happy. The memory that surfaced surprised her. She was 8 years old, making cookies with her grandmother in the tiny kitchen of their apartment. Flour covered every surface. Victoria's face was smeared with chocolate, and her grandmother was laughing at something Victoria had said about how the cookie dough looked like mud pies. The secret ingredient, her grandmother had said, kissing Victoria's forehead, is always love. You can't taste it, but you can feel it. Victoria had believed her then. She'd believed that love was something you could bake into cookies and feel in hugs and see in the way someone's eyes lit up when you walked into a room. When had she stopped believing that? The sound of a car pulling into her driveway interrupted her thoughts. Victoria glanced at her watch. 6:30 p.m. Too late for Marcus's regular cleaning schedule. Her heart began to race as she heard car doors slam and the sound of children's voices. She crept to the front window and peered through the blinds. Marcus's beat-up Honda Civic sat in her driveway, and he was unbuckling car seats while Emma and Sophie bounced excitedly beside him. All three of them looked dressed up. Marcus in a button-down shirt instead of his usual uniform. The twins in matching yellow dresses that made them look like little sunbeams. Victoria's doorbell rang. She stood frozen for a full 30 seconds, her mind racing through possibilities. Was there a cleaning emergency? Had something happened? Why were they dressed up? The doorbell rang again, followed by a small voice calling out, "Hello? Is the sad lady home?" Victoria's heart melted completely. She smoothed her hair, checked her appearance in the hallway mirror, and opened the door. Marcus stood on her doorstep looking embarrassed and apologetic, with Emma and Sophie flanking him like tiny bodyguards. Up close, Victoria could see that the twins had attempted to style their own hair. Emma's curls were held back with approximately 12 different colored clips, while Sophie's were braided with what appeared to be yarn. "Ms. Sterling, I'm so sorry to bother you at home," Marcus began. "There was a mix-up with my childcare and I had an emergency call from the building management company about a water leak in the lobby. I know this is completely inappropriate, but I didn't have anyone else to call and the girls were already dressed for their school's spring concert and—" "We brought you something," Sophie interrupted, stepping forward with a small wrapped package clutched in her hands. Emma nodded eagerly. "We made it at school for someone special and Daddy said you might like it." Victoria looked down at the two little girls beaming up at her with such pure excitement that she felt her throat close up. "You made something for me?" "It's because you're always alone," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "Sophie said maybe you don't have anyone to make you presents, so we made you one." Victoria knelt down to their eye level, bringing her face close to theirs for the first time. This close, she could see that they had Maria's eyes, warm brown and full of life, but Marcus's stubborn chin and his gentle smile. "May I open it?" she asked softly. Sophie nodded so enthusiastically that her yarn-braided hair bounced. "We picked the colors ourselves." Victoria carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small clay bowl, clearly handmade by children's hands. It was lopsided and painted in bright, clashing colors with 2 small handprints pressed into the sides. Around the rim, in wobbly letters, someone had written, "For the sad lady's heart to hold love." Victoria stared at the bowl, her vision blurring as tears threatened to spill over. It was the most beautiful, imperfect, meaningful gift she'd ever received. "Do you like it?" Emma asked anxiously. "I love it," Victoria whispered and meant it completely. "It's the most wonderful present anyone has ever given me." The twins beamed and clapped their hands together. Marcus looked stunned by her emotional response. "Girls, what do you say we let Ms. Sterling get back to her evening?" he said gently. "Actually," Victoria heard herself saying, "would you like to come in for a few minutes? I was just making some tea." This was a complete lie. Victoria never made tea, barely knew how to operate her own kitchen, but she couldn't bear the thought of them leaving so soon. The twins looked at their father with pleading expressions. Marcus hesitated. "We wouldn't want to impose." "Please," Emma asked, We never get to see inside a real mansion. Just for a little while, Victoria said, surprising herself. I'd like to thank you properly for this beautiful gift. Marcus nodded slowly and Victoria stepped aside to let them in. The moment the twins crossed her threshold, Victoria's sterile house came alive. Emma immediately gasped at the chandelier in the foyer. Daddy, look, it's like the one in Beauty and the Beast. While Sophie ran her small hands along the marble walls with wonder. Your house is so big, Sophie marveled. Do you ever get lost? Sometimes, Victoria admitted, realizing it was true in more ways than one. She led them to the kitchen, where she fumbled through the process of making tea while the twins explored with wide eyes. Marcus stayed close to them, ready to redirect their curiosity if they got too adventurous. But Victoria found herself saying, It's okay. Let them look around. Are you sure? They can be pretty energetic. Victoria watched Emma examining her refrigerator with the intensity of a scientist, while Sophie discovered the button that made ice cubes drop from the freezer door. Their delight in these simple things made Victoria see her own home through new eyes. I'm sure, she said. As the tea steeped, Emma climbed onto one of the bar stools and studied Victoria with the directness that only children possess. Why are you sad all the time, Emma? Marcus warned gently. It's okay, Victoria said. She looked into Emma's earnest little face and found herself answering honestly. I think I forgot how to be happy. That's silly, Sophie declared, joining her sister at the counter. Being happy is easy, you just think about good things. What kind of good things? Like puppies, Emma said immediately. And ice cream, Sophie added. And hugs from people you love. And when Daddy makes pancakes on Saturday mornings. And when we find pretty rocks at the park. And when it rains and we can jump in puddles. The twins continued their list, each addition more enthusiastic than the last. And Victoria found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. Marcus watched her transformation with amazement. They have a point, you know. Happiness isn't about having everything perfect. It's about noticing the good things that are already there. But what if you don't know how to notice them anymore? Victoria asked. Then you practice, Emma said with the wisdom of someone who had learned to find joy again after profound loss. Like when we were sad about Mommy. Daddy taught us to look for one good thing every day, even when we didn't want to. What's your good thing today? Victoria asked. The twins exchanged a look, and then smiled at her in perfect synchronization. You, Sophie said simply. You're our good thing today because you let us come inside and you like our present. Victoria felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, like a door that had been locked for 15 years finally creaking open. Looking at these two little girls who had lost their mother but still believed in goodness, who prayed for strangers and made gifts for people they barely knew, Victoria realized what Marcus had been trying to tell her. Love wasn't something you earned or achieved or bought. It was something you chose to see, something you chose to give, something you chose to believe in even when the world gave you every reason not to. And sitting in her sterile kitchen, drinking tea with a janitor and his twin daughters who had declared her their good thing for the day, Victoria Sterling made a choice that would change everything. She chose to believe in love again. You know what? She said, looking at Marcus and then at the twins. I think you three might be my good thing today too. The twins cheered and clapped their hands, and Marcus smiled at her with such warmth that Victoria felt like she was seeing sunlight for the first time in years. But none of them could have predicted what would happen when Victoria decided to dig deeper into Marcus's past, or what she would discover about the connection between their families that ran deeper than any of them had ever imagined. The following Saturday morning, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She woke up without an alarm clock and actually wanted to get out of bed. For the first time since building her empire, she had something to look forward to that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or market projections. She was going to make pancakes. Victoria had never made pancakes in her life, but after Emma and Sophie's enthusiastic description of their Saturday morning tradition with their father, she'd found herself researching recipes at midnight like she was preparing for a board presentation. She'd even driven to 3 different grocery stores to find the perfect pancake mix, though she had no idea what made one mix more perfect than another. Her phone buzzed with a text message that made her heart skip. Ms. Sterling, the girls wanted me to ask if you'd like to join us for breakfast this morning. We're making pancakes and they insist you need to learn the proper technique. Marcus. Victoria stared at the message for a full minute, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was inappropriate. She was a billionaire CEO, not someone who had casual breakfast dates with her employees. This blurred every professional boundary she'd ever maintained. But the part of her that had awakened 3 nights ago, the part that had chosen to believe in love again, typed back without hesitation, "I'd love to. What time should I be there?" The response came immediately. The girls wake up at 7 a.m. sharp every Saturday demanding pancakes. Fair warning, they take their breakfast very seriously. Address, 1247 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Victoria looked at the clock. 6:15 a.m. She had 45 minutes to get ready for what felt like the most important meeting of her life. An hour later, Victoria Sterling stood outside a modest apartment complex in East LA, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked up at a roadside stand and wearing jeans for the first time in her adult life. The building was nothing like her Beverly Hills mansion. The paint was fading, the landscaping was minimal, and the parking lot had more potholes than asphalt. But somehow, it felt more like home than her $15 million house ever had. She climbed the stairs to the third floor, her heart pounding harder than it had during her first IPO announcement. Before she could knock, the door flew open to reveal Emma and Sophie in matching pajamas covered in cartoon pancakes. "She came! She came!" Sophie shrieked, launching herself at Victoria's legs. Emma was right behind her. "Daddy said you might be too busy, but we knew you'd come because you promised." Victoria had never actually promised, but looking down at their beaming faces, she realized that some promises were made without words. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, and meant it completely. Marcus appeared in the doorway, wearing faded jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days, his hair still messy from sleep. Victoria had only ever seen him in his work uniform, and this casual version of him made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness. "Welcome to our humble kingdom," he said with a smile that made her forget how to breathe. "Fair warning, the girls have appointed themselves your pancake-making tutors, and they take the job very seriously." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that spoke of a life being truly lived. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Books were stacked on every available surface, and the scent of coffee and vanilla filled the air. It was the opposite of Victoria's sterile mansion in every way, and she loved every inch of it. "First lesson," Emma announced, dragging Victoria toward the kitchen. "You have to wear an apron so you don't get messy." Sophie produced a bright yellow apron covered in sunflowers and insisted on tying it around Victoria's waist herself. "Daddy always says cooking is about love, not looking perfect." Victoria glanced at Marcus, who was watching the scene with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Smart man, your daddy." "The smartest," the twins declared in unison. For the next 2 hours, Victoria Sterling, master of the corporate universe, received intensive training in the art of pancake making from 2 6-year-old experts. She learned that the secret was not to overmix the batter. "It makes them tough like old shoes," Sophie explained seriously. "That the first pancake was always a sacrifice to the pancake gods. It never comes out right, but you have to make it anyway," Emma added. "And that the most important ingredient was laughter." Victoria burned the first batch, made the second batch too thick, and finally achieved pancake perfection on the third try, much to the twins' delight. "See?" Emma said, taking a bite of Victoria's creation. "You just needed practice. And love," Sophie added. "I can taste the love now." Victoria thought about her grandmother's words from so many years ago about love being the secret ingredient you could feel, but not taste, and her throat tightened with emotion. After breakfast, while the twins played in the living room, Victoria helped Marcus with the dishes. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates and cups. Victoria was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the way he hummed softly under his breath, and the gentle competence with which he moved through these domestic routines. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. "I can't remember the last time I felt so normal." Marcus glanced at her, his hands stilling in the soapy water. "Normal is overrated. I prefer real." "What's the difference?" "Normal is what people expect you to be. Real is who you are when nobody's watching." He dried his hands and turned to face her fully. "The Victoria I met 3 nights ago, the one who knelt down to my daughter's eye level and cried over a handmade clay bowl, that's real. The Victoria who just spent 2 hours learning to make pancakes from 2 6-year-olds without checking her phone once, that's real." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You noticed I didn't check my phone?" "I notice a lot of things about you, Victoria Sterling." The way he said her name, soft and careful like a prayer, made something flutter dangerously in her chest. Before she could respond, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Daddy, can we show Victoria the photo album? The one with Mommy in it?" Marcus hesitated. "Sweetheart, that might be boring for Miss Sterling." "Actually," Victoria said quickly. I'd love to see it, if you don't mind sharing. 20 minutes later, Victoria found herself curled up on Marcus's worn couch with a twin on each side, looking through a photo album that chronicled the life of Maria Elena Rodriguez. The woman who smiled back at her from dozens of pictures was radiantly beautiful, with kind eyes and an infectious laugh that seemed to jump off the page. That's our wedding day, Marcus said softly, pointing to a photo of him and Maria dancing under string lights. They looked impossibly young and completely in love. She was 23, I was 25. We'd known each other since we were kids, but it took me until senior year of high school to work up the courage to ask her out. Tell her about the proposal, Sophie demanded. Marcus's cheeks reddened slightly. I saved for 8 months to buy her a ring. Nothing fancy, just a small diamond from a pawn shop. But I wanted to do something special, so I waited until Christmas Eve and hid the ring in her stocking. But Mommy found it while she was helping Grandma stuff the stockings. Emma continued the story with obvious delight. She spent the whole evening pretending to be surprised. Marcus laughed. I didn't find out until years later that she'd known since the moment she felt the box. Victoria studied the engagement photos, struck by the pure joy radiating from both young faces. She was beautiful. Inside and out, Marcus agreed. Maria never met a stranger. She'd bring home stray cats, homeless teenagers, anyone who needed help. Our tiny apartment was always full of people she'd decided needed feeding, or mothering, or both. Like us, Sophie piped up. Mommy always said our house was small, but our hearts were big enough for everyone. They continued through the album, and Victoria watched Marcus and Maria's love story unfold. Their tiny wedding, their first apartment, Maria's nursing school graduation, the twins' birth, birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons made extraordinary by love. But it was the final photos that broke Victoria's heart. Pictures from the hospital where Maria had been born, where she'd trained as a nurse, where she died on a rainy Tuesday night in March. She was working a double shift because they were short-staffed, Marcus said quietly. I begged her to call in sick, told her we could figure out the money somehow. But Maria never could ignore it when people needed her. Victoria looked at a photo of Maria in her nursing scrubs, surrounded by elderly patients who were smiling at her like she was their own granddaughter. She looks like she was born to care for people. She was. It's funny. I always thought I'd be the one to go first. I worked construction, dangerous jobs I never imagined. Marcus's voice trailed off. But she's still here, Emma said matter-of-factly, pointing to her heart. Daddy taught us that people don't really go away if you keep loving them. Victoria looked at Marcus with new understanding. That's why you still wear your wedding ring. Marcus touched the chain around his neck where his wedding band hung next to his cross. Some love stories don't end with death. They just change form. Something in his voice made Victoria look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something he wasn't saying, something important hovering in the space between words. Marcus, she began, but was interrupted by Sophie jumping up from the couch. Can we show her the special box now? The one with Mommy's treasure? Marcus hesitated. I don't know if that's... Please, Daddy. You said Mommy would want us to share her treasures with people who understand love. Marcus studied Victoria's face for a long moment, as if weighing some internal decision. Finally, he nodded and disappeared into what Victoria assumed was his bedroom. He returned carrying a small wooden box that looked handmade, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Maria kept everything that mattered to her in here, he said, settling back onto the couch. She called it her heart box because she said it held pieces of her heart. He opened the box to reveal an eclectic collection of treasures. Ticket stubs from their first movie date, pressed flowers from their wedding bouquet, hospital ID badges, tiny hair ribbons that had belonged to the twins as babies, letters written in Maria's graceful handwriting. But it was the item at the bottom of the box that made Victoria's world tilt sideways. Marcus lifted out a small, faded photograph and handed it to her. This was Maria's most precious possession. She found it in a box of her grandmother's things after she died. Victoria stared at the photo, her hands beginning to tremble. It showed two young women, probably in their early 20s, standing in front of what looked like a hospital. They were both wearing nursing student uniforms and had their arms around each other, laughing at something outside the camera's view. One of the women looked exactly like Maria. The other looked exactly like Victoria's mother. Where? Victoria's voice came out as barely a whisper. Where was this taken? Marcus frowned at her reaction. St. Mary's Hospital, downtown LA. Maria's grandmother Elena was in nursing school there in 1965. According to the writing on the back, she was best friends with her study partner. They were going to be each other's maids of honor. going to work at the same hospital after graduation. But something happened. Elena would never talk about what, and they lost touch. With shaking hands, Victoria turned the photo over. In faded blue ink, someone had written, Elena Rodriguez and Catherine Morrison, sisters in everything but blood, class of '66. Catherine Morrison had been Victoria's mother's maiden name. Victoria? Marcus was looking at her with concern. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Victoria couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The photo fell from her numb fingers as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Maria's grandmother Elena and Victoria's mother Catherine hadn't just been nursing school classmates. They had been best friends. The woman who had raised Marcus's wife was the same woman Victoria's mother had told stories about, the friend she'd lost touch with after some mysterious falling out, the friend she'd regretted losing for the rest of her life, which meant that Maria and Victoria's mother had essentially been cousins, which meant that Marcus's daughters were connected to Victoria by bonds deeper than employment or chance encounters, which meant that Emma and Sophie hadn't just randomly chosen to pray for a sad stranger, they had been praying for family. Victoria stared at the photograph in her trembling hands, her mind reeling as pieces of a puzzle she'd never known existed began falling into place. The room seemed to spin around her as Marcus's concerned voice faded into background noise. Victoria? Hey, talk to me. What's wrong? She looked up at him, then at Emma and Sophie who were watching her with wide, worried eyes. How could she explain that the random act of kindness that had brought them into her life wasn't random at all? How could she tell them that the prayer they'd been offering for a stranger had actually been meant for someone who was connected to them by invisible threads of love and loss stretching back 30 years? This woman, Victoria managed to whisper, pointing to the photo. Catherine Morrison. She was my mother. Marcus went very still. That's impossible. No, it's not. Victoria's voice grew stronger as the shock began to wear off. My mother used to tell me stories about her best friend in nursing school, Elena Rodriguez. She said they were inseparable, like sisters. She said losing Elena was one of her biggest regrets. But that would mean... Marcus trailed off, his eyes widening as he realized the implications. That would mean our families have been connected for generations, Victoria finished. That would mean Maria was essentially my cousin. That would mean Emma and Sophie. She looked at the twins who were listening with the intensity of children who sensed something momentous was happening. That would mean you two are my family. Sophie clapped her hands together. I knew it. I told Emma you felt like family. Emma nodded sagely. That's why we could see your sadness. Mommy always said family hearts can recognize each other even when the people don't know they're related. Marcus was staring at Victoria like she'd just revealed she could fly. This is incredible. Maria always wondered what happened to her grandmother's best friend. Elena used to cry every year on Catherine's birthday, saying she wished she could apologize for something that happened right before graduation. Apologize for what? Elena never said. Just that there had been a terrible misunderstanding, and by the time she realized the truth, Catherine had already moved away and gotten married. She tried to find her for years but never could. Victoria felt pieces of her own family history shifting into new configurations. My mother moved to San Francisco right after nursing school. She married my father there, but she always talked about LA like it was the love of her life that got away. She said she'd left her heart in Los Angeles with a friend who'd meant everything to her. Marcus reached for a letter from the bottom of the heart box. This might explain things. It's the last letter Elena ever wrote to your mother. She never sent it. With hands that shook slightly, Victoria unfolded the yellowed paper. The letter was dated March 15, 1966, just weeks before nursing school graduation. My dearest Catherine, Victoria read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you will probably never forgive me for what I said, but I have to try to explain. When I saw you with Richard Morrison at the spring dance, I thought you had chosen him over our plans to work at the children's hospital together. I was hurt and jealous, and said terrible things about you abandoning our dreams for a man who would never understand your calling. Victoria looked up at Marcus. Richard Morrison was my father's name. She continued reading, but Miguel told me the truth today. Richard isn't your boyfriend, he's your brother visiting from San Francisco. You were introducing him to your friends because you were proud of him, and I was too blinded by fear of losing you to see what was right in front of my eyes. By the time I understood my mistake, you had already packed your things and left. Catherine, you are the sister of my heart. If I have lost your friendship over my foolish jealousy, I will never forgive myself. Please come back. Please let me fix this. Our friendship means more to me than my pride. With all my love and deepest regret, Elena. The room was completely silent except for the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel. Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she imagined her mother, young and heartbroken, leaving Los Angeles because of a misunderstanding that could have been resolved with a single conversation. She never got this letter, Victoria whispered. Elena carried the guilt for the rest of her life, Marcus said softly. She used to tell Maria that her biggest regret was letting pride get in the way of love. It's why she taught Maria to always fight for the people who mattered, no matter how scared she was of getting hurt. Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. So that means Mommy and your mommy were like cousins? Something like that, sweetheart. And that means you're our family too, Sophie declared triumphantly. Victoria looked at the two little girls who had been praying for her broken heart, without knowing they were praying for someone who belonged to them. The cosmic justice of it took her breath away. There's more, Marcus said quietly. He reached deeper into the box and pulled out a small piece of paper that looked like it had been folded and unfolded hundreds of times. Elena made me promise to give this to Maria when she turned 18. It's a list of dreams she and your mother made together when they were young. Victoria unfolded the paper and read, Elena and Catherine's life plan. Graduate nursing school together. Work at LA Children's Hospital. Be each other's maids of honor. Raise our children to be best friends. Grow old telling stories about when we were young and thought we could change the world. Never let anything come between us. Not jobs, not men, not pride. Sisters forever. The last line was underlined 3 times and signed by both women. Victoria closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of dreams deferred and love interrupted by misunderstanding. When she opened them again, Marcus was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Do you know what this means? He asked softly. That our mothers should have been sisters? That we're continuing their story? Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Elena used to tell Maria that some connections are too strong to be broken by time or distance or even death. She said that love has a way of finding its path, even if it takes generations. Victoria looked at Emma and Sophie, who were listening with the rapt attention children reserved for fairy tales. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life proving that sometimes, just sometimes, love really did find a way. The girls have been praying for you for weeks, Marcus continued. Not because I told them to, but because they felt drawn to you. They kept saying you reminded them of someone, but they couldn't figure out who. We know now, Emma announced. You remind us of Mommy because you're family. But that's not all, Sophie added with the dramatic flair of a natural storyteller. Tell her about the dream, Daddy. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Girls, I don't think... What dream? Victoria asked. Marcus sighed. A few weeks ago, Sophie had a very vivid dream about Maria. She said Maria told her that she was sending someone special to help take care of you, and that we needed to be ready to open our hearts to new love. Victoria felt the world shift beneath her feet. New love? Marcus met her eyes directly. The thing is, Victoria, I've been falling in love with you since the day you knelt down to accept that clay bowl from my daughters. And finding out about our family connection doesn't change that. It just makes everything feel like it was always meant to be. The confession hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terrifying in its honesty. Victoria stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Marcus, I know it's crazy, he continued quickly. I know we come from different worlds, that you're my employer, that this complicates everything, but I also know that Maria used to say the heart knows what it knows, and my heart knows it's yours if you want it. Emma and Sophie had gone very quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. Victoria looked at these 3 people who had stumbled into her life and turned everything upside down in the most beautiful way possible. She thought about her mother and Elena, about dreams deferred and connections that transcended time and circumstances. She thought about the choice she'd made 3 days ago to believe in love again. What if I told you, Victoria said carefully, that I've been falling in love with you too? What if I told you that for the first time in my life, I understand what my grandmother meant when she said love was the secret ingredient you could feel but not taste? Marcus's smile was like sunrise breaking over water. Then I'd say that maybe our mothers are somewhere laughing about how long it took us to figure out what they knew 30 years ago. That we belong together? Victoria whispered. That love always finds a way. Emma and Sophie erupted in cheers and applause, bouncing on the couch like they'd just witnessed the best movie ending ever. But their celebration was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Marcus frowned. I'm not expecting anyone. He opened the door to reveal a well-dressed woman in her 50s, holding an official-looking envelope. Marcus Rodriguez? Yes? I'm Janet Williams from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about a complaint we've received regarding your daughters. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Marcus went pale. Emma and Sophie pressed close to their father, suddenly sensing danger. What kind of complaint? Marcus asked. his voice carefully controlled. A report that you've been bringing your children to work with you, specifically to the home of Victoria Sterling. The caller expressed concern about the appropriateness of exposing young children to what they termed unsuitable living situations, and suggested that perhaps alternative custody arrangements might be in the children's best interest. Victoria felt rage like she'd never experienced before flooding her system. Someone had deliberately tried to destroy Marcus's family, and she had a sinking suspicion she knew exactly who. But as she watched Marcus instinctively wrap his arms around his daughters, she realized that this crisis might be the thing that would test whether the love they'd just confessed was strong enough to survive in the real world. The fairy tale was about to become a fight for their very survival as a family. Victoria's mind raced as she processed the social worker's words. She'd built a billion-dollar empire by staying 3 steps ahead of her competition. And right now, every instinct she'd honed in 15 years of corporate warfare was screaming that this wasn't a routine welfare check. "May I ask who filed this complaint?" she asked, stepping forward. Janet Williams looked surprised to see Victoria. "Ms. Sterling, I wasn't aware you were here." The complaint was filed anonymously, but given the specific details provided, it came from someone with intimate knowledge of the situation. Victoria's jaw clenched. There were only 3 people who knew about Marcus bringing his daughters to her house. Herself, Marcus, and Patricia Carlisle, her assistant of 5 years who had access to her calendar and home security system. "I see." Victoria's voice carried the same ice-cold authority that had made Fortune 500 CEOs tremble. "And what exactly did this anonymous caller claim? That Mr. Rodriguez has been inappropriately involving his minor children in his employment, exposing them to potentially unsuitable environments, and that his judgment as a parent may be compromised." Emma and Sophie pressed closer to their father, and Victoria saw fear in their eyes for the first time since she'd known them. The sight of their terror ignited something fierce and protective in her chest. "Ms. Williams," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I am Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries and Mr. Rodriguez's employer. I can assure you that any concern about these children's welfare is not only unfounded, but malicious." The social worker looked uncertain. "Ms. Sterling, while I appreciate your input, there are protocols." "Of course there are protocols, I respect that completely." Victoria's tone softened just enough to sound reasonable while maintaining her authority. "But before we continue, I think you should know some important context about this situation." Victoria gestured toward the living room. "May we sit down? This is going to take a moment to explain properly." Janet Williams hesitated, then nodded. As they settled into the living room, Victoria noticed Marcus watching her with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. Emma and Sophie had climbed onto their father's lap, sensing that something momentous was happening. "Ms. Williams," Victoria began, "3 weeks ago I discovered that Mr. Rodriguez's daughters had been accompanying him during one of his cleaning appointments at my home. You're absolutely right that this violated standard protocols." Marcus started to speak, but Victoria held up a gentle hand. However, what the anonymous caller failed to mention is that this happened due to a childcare emergency, and when I learned about it, I didn't fire Mr. Rodriguez or report him. Instead, I invited him and his daughters to have tea with me. Victoria reached for the clay bowl Emma and Sophie had made her, which she'd brought with her that morning. "These children made this for me because they noticed I seemed sad and wanted to help. In doing so, they gave me something I'd been missing for 15 years, a sense of family." She looked directly at Janet Williams. "I need you to understand something crucial about this situation. Mr. Rodriguez isn't just my employee. His late wife, Maria, was the granddaughter of Elena Rodriguez, who was my mother, Catherine Morrison's best friend and nursing school partner. Our families have been connected for over 30 years, though we only discovered this today." Victoria reached for the photographs and letter from Maria's heartbox. "This documentation proves the family connection. What you're witnessing isn't an inappropriate employer-employee relationship. It's the reunion of 2 families who lost each other due to a misunderstanding 30 years ago." Janet Williams examined the photographs and Elena's unsent letter, her expression shifting from official suspicion to genuine surprise. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "I want to be completely transparent about my relationship with Mr. Rodriguez and his daughters. As of today, I have formally invited them to move in with me, not as employer and employee, but as family." Marcus's eyes widened. They hadn't discussed this, but Victoria pressed on with the confidence of someone who had just realized what she'd been searching for her entire life. "I am financially able to provide for Emma and Sophie's every need, including the finest education, healthcare, and opportunities available. More importantly, I am emotionally committed to being the family these children deserve. Victoria knelt down to Emma and Sophie's eye level, just as she had the first night she'd really seen them. Girls, how would you feel about coming to live in my big house? You could have your own rooms and your daddy would never have to worry about childcare again, and we could make pancakes every Saturday morning in a kitchen big enough for all of us. The twins looked at their father, then at Victoria, their eyes wide with possibility. Would you really want us to live with you? Sophie asked in a small voice. Forever and always, Victoria said without hesitation. If your daddy says yes, and if Ms. Williams agrees that it's in your best interest. Emma studied Victoria's face with the intensity children brought to important decisions. Would you be like our new mommy? Victoria felt her throat close up. I could never replace your mommy, sweetheart. She was special and wonderful and she'll always be your real mommy. But I could love you like a mommy loves if you'd let me. We talked about this, Sophie whispered to her sister. Remember? In our prayers, we asked God to send us someone to help Daddy not be so lonely. Emma nodded solemnly. And we asked for someone who would love us even though we're not their real children. Well, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion, it turns out you are my real children in every way that matters. We're family, remember? Marcus cleared his throat, and Victoria looked up to see tears streaming down his face. Victoria, are you sure? This is a huge decision. Your entire life would change. Victoria stood and faced him directly. Marcus Rodriguez, my life changed the moment I heard your daughters pray for my broken heart. Everything since then has just been me figuring out how to catch up to what they already knew. She turned back to Janet Williams. Ms. Williams, I understand you need to do your due diligence. I welcome a full investigation into my background, my home, my finances, and my ability to provide a stable, loving environment for these children. I also want you to know that whoever filed this complaint did so with malicious intent, not out of genuine concern for Emma and Sophie's welfare. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled to a text message. In fact, I received this message from my assistant Patricia Carlisle 20 minutes after your visit began. She says, and I quote, I hope you've learned your lesson about getting too involved with the help. Some boundaries exist for good reasons. I believe you'll find that Ms. Carlisle is your anonymous caller. Janet Williams made a note in her file. That's very helpful information, Ms. Sterling. There's one more thing. Victoria looked at Marcus, her heart hammering. Ms. Williams, I want you to know that I'm not just offering to provide for these children out of charity or obligation. I'm in love with their father, and I want us to be a real family in every sense of the word. The words hung in the air like a declaration of independence from everything Victoria's old life had been. Marcus stared at her with wonder, while Emma and Sophie giggled and whispered to each other. So you want to marry our daddy? Emma asked with the directness children used to cut through adult complexity. Victoria looked at Marcus, her heart in her eyes. If he'll have me. Marcus stood up, setting the twins gently on the couch. He walked over to Victoria and took her hands in his work-roughened ones. Victoria Sterling, 3 weeks ago I was a widower trying to raise 2 little girls on minimum wage and prayer. Today I'm standing in my living room with the woman I love, discovering that our families were meant to be connected all along. He dropped to one knee right there in front of the social worker, the twins, and God himself. I don't have a ring, I don't have much money, and I can't offer you anything except a heart that loves you completely, and 2 little girls who think you hung the moon. Will you marry me? Victoria didn't hesitate. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. Emma and Sophie erupted in cheers and applause while Janet Williams watched the scene with what might have been the beginning of a smile. Well, the social worker said finally, this is certainly not what I expected to find today. Ms. Sterling, Mr. Rodriguez, I'll need to conduct home visits and background checks, but based on what I've observed here, I see no immediate cause for concern regarding these children's welfare. In fact, I see 2 little girls who are clearly loved and well cared for. She closed her file and stood to leave. I'll be in touch within the week to schedule the formal evaluations, but I suspect this case will be closed quickly. Congratulations to all of you. After Janet Williams left, Victoria found herself surrounded by her new family in Marcus's tiny living room. Emma was showing her the bedroom she'd be sharing with Sophie until they moved to Victoria's house, while Sophie was already making plans for redecorating what would become their new rooms. Marcus pulled Victoria aside as the twins chattered excitedly about their transformed future. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. I mean, really sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be Emma and Sophie's mom. You'll be married to a guy who cleans buildings for a living, and your entire world will change. Victoria looked around the small apartment that felt more like home than her mansion ever had. She looked at Emma arranging her stuffed animals to show Victoria which ones were family ready and which ones were still learning to share. She looked at Sophie, who was already composing a prayer of thanksgiving for their miracle family. She looked at Marcus, who was offering her everything he had without apology or pretense. "Marcus," she said softly, "I built a billion-dollar empire, but I never built a home. I commanded respect from thousands of employees, but I never had anyone who loved me just for being me. I achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I never had the one thing that actually mattered, which is family. Love that doesn't have conditions or quarterly reviews. People who pray for you when you're sad and teach you to make pancakes and give you handmade gifts because they want your heart to have somewhere to hold love." Victoria kissed him softly, sealing the promise they'd just made. "My grandmother used to say that love was the secret ingredient you could feel but not taste. I thought I understood what she meant, but I didn't. Not until now." "And now?" Victoria smiled, the same radiant smile that had been hiding for 15 years finally finding its way home. "Now I know that love isn't just an ingredient. Love is the recipe, and Emma, Sophie, and you are teaching me how to cook." 6 months later, Victoria Sterling Rodriguez stood in the garden of her Beverly Hills home, watching her husband push their daughters on the swing set he'd installed where her meditation fountain used to be. The house that had once been a sterile showcase was now filled with children's laughter, family photos, and the kind of beautiful chaos that came from a life being truly lived. Emma and Sophie had transformed not just Victoria's home, but her heart. The twins had helped her turn her cold mansion into a warm sanctuary, where love grew in every corner. Marcus had left his cleaning job to help Victoria manage the charitable foundation they'd started together, the Elena and Catherine Foundation, dedicated to helping single parents and reuniting families. As Victoria watched her family play in the golden afternoon light, she thought about the prayer that had started it all. 2 little girls asking God to heal a stranger's broken heart had set in motion a love story that spanned generations and proved that sometimes the most beautiful endings were actually new beginnings. Patricia Carlisle had been quietly dismissed, and her reference letters made it clear why. Victoria had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, every day, for the people who mattered most. "Mommy Victoria," Sophie called out, using the name the twins had chosen for her. "Come push us too." Victoria Sterling, the woman who had once believed that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, ran across the grass to join her family. As she pushed her daughters higher toward the sky, listening to their delighted shrieks and her husband's encouraging cheers, she finally understood her grandmother's secret ingredient. Love wasn't something you added to life. It was what made life worth living. And as the sun set over Beverly Hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility, the prayer that 2 6-year-old girls had whispered for a sad stranger had been answered in ways none of them could have ever imagined. Sometimes love really did find a way.